9 months had passed since the divorce papers had been signed, since the ink bled across the page that severed not only a marriage but an empire of shared dreams. For Alexander Hart, the billionaire who had built his fortune with sharp instincts and an iron will, the end of his marriage to Elena was the only deal he had ever lost. He buried himself in work, expanded his holdings, and drowned in the opulence of penthouses and boardrooms. But no matter how gilded the walls of his world, they did not silence the emptiness. Elena had walked away with her dignity intact, though her heart was in tatters. She had chosen freedom over a life of cold silences and unmet tenderness. She had craved warmth, understanding, not just diamonds delivered by assistants or vacations planned by secretaries. Still, leaving Alexander had been like tearing herself in two. Now, 9 months later, fate twisted their paths together again, this time under the harsh glow of fluorescent hospital lights. The unexpected encounter. Elena sat in the pediatric ward's waiting area, her face pale, her fingers knotted together in restless prayer. Her baby, her tiny son, Daniel, was in urgent need of heart surgery. The diagnosis had come like a blow, a congenital defect that required immediate intervention. The doctors had spoken with measured words, but the message was clear. Without the surgery, the child might not survive. Her insurance had covered the basics, but not the astronomical cost of the specialized procedure required. She had tried everything, fundraisers, loans, reaching out to family. Nothing had come close, and in the end, she had done what she swore she would never do again. She had called him. The echo of her message still haunted her. Alexander, it's Elena. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't desperate. It's about my son. He needs surgery. Please. Now she waited, fearing that he wouldn't come. Fearing even more that he would. The click of polished shoes on tile broke through her thoughts. Elena looked up, and her breath caught. Alexander Hart stood before her, impossibly tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that seemed almost too severe for a hospital corridor. His presence radiated authority, the kind that made men lower their voices and women hold their gaze too long. But Elena saw beyond the billionaire facade. She saw the man she had once loved, the man she had left, and the one she had never truly stopped aching for. Elena, his voice was low, steady, carrying an edge of disbelief. His eyes flicked to her trembling hands. Where is he? Her lips parted. In the ICU. They're stabilizing him before surgery. She swallowed hard. Thank you for coming. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing, his gaze locked on hers. Then, without another word, he gestured for her to lead the way. The child he didn't expect. Through the glass of the intensive care room, Alexander's gaze landed on the small figure in the crib, tiny limbs, fragile breaths, wires and monitors beeping a fragile symphony of life. His chest tightened with something unfamiliar, something that clawed at the fortress of control he had built around himself. He turned sharply to Elena. This is your son. Her chin lifted defensively. Yes. His name is Daniel. He hesitated. How old is he? 6 months, she whispered. The calculation was instant, merciless. Their divorce had been finalized 9 months ago. He turned his eyes back to the baby, his jaw tightening. Elena, he said, voice taut, is he mine? The question sliced the air. Elena's throat constricted. She had dreaded this moment, rehearsed 1,000 ways to explain, but none of them mattered now. Tears welled in her eyes. Yes, she whispered, he's yours. The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate. Alexander stared at the child, his child, and felt his world tilt. No boardroom negotiation, no billion-dollar deal had ever unmoored him this way. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, anger sharpening his tone. I wanted to, she said, voice trembling. But after the divorce, after everything we said, I thought you didn't want a family with me. You made it clear you only had room for your empire. I didn't want to trap you into a life you resented. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, battling the storm inside him. He had lost 9 months of his son's life, 9 months he could never reclaim. Crisis and confrontation. The doctor entered, breaking the tension. We've reviewed the case. The surgery is urgent, but costly. Without it, the prognosis is poor. I'll cover everything, Alexander said without hesitation, his voice like steel. The doctor nodded, relief flashing in his eyes. We'll proceed immediately. As the doctor left, Elena looked at Alexander, torn between gratitude and fear. Thank you, but I didn't call you for money alone. I thought you deserved to know. That he deserved to know his father. Alexander's gaze softened, just slightly. And now, she whispered, I don't know how to let you back in without breaking all over again. The rawness in her voice pierced him deeper than any accusation. He had been the one to build walls between them, prioritizing power over partnership, control over compassion. But now, with his son's fragile life in balance, those walls seemed meaningless. Elena, he said quietly, let me prove that I can be more than what I was. The long night. They waited through the night together, side by side in the sterile waiting room. The surgery stretched into hours. Elena's head eventually rested against Alexander's shoulder, exhaustion pulling her under. He remained rigid, every muscle coiled, his hand clenched on the armrest. For the first time in years, he prayed. Not for markets to shift or contracts to close, but for the life of a tiny boy he had only just met. His boy. When the surgeon finally emerged, the relief on his face was answer enough. The surgery was successful. He's stable, but recovery will take time. Elena broke into tears, her body trembling with release. Alexander caught her instinctively, his arms encircling her. For a moment, they were no longer billionaire and ex-wife, no longer fractured by pride and past mistakes. They were simply two parents clinging to hope. The road ahead. In the days that followed, Alexander remained at the hospital. He brought in the best specialists, arranged private care, and ensured every detail of Daniel's recovery was flawless. But beyond the logistics, he was there, holding his son's hand, watching him breathe, learning the rhythm of fatherhood in hushed, tentative steps. Elena watched him, torn between awe and fear. She had seen him command boardrooms, intimidate rivals, and dominate markets, but never had she seen him so vulnerable. When he whispered to Daniel, when he brushed a gentle hand over the baby's cheek, she saw the man she had once fallen in love with, the man who had been buried beneath ambition. One evening, as Daniel slept peacefully, Alexander turned to her. I want to be part of his life. Not as a visitor, not as a benefactor. As his father, and if you'll let me, as more than that. Elena's breath caught. Alexander, I know I failed you, he admitted. I thought building an empire would be enough, that providing wealth would equal love. I was wrong. If you give me another chance, I'll fight for us, with the same ferocity I've fought for everything else. But this time, not as a billionaire. As a man, as a father, as your partner. Tears glistened in Elena's eyes. She had sworn to protect herself, to never again risk the pain of loving him. But watching him cradle their child, watching him strip away the armor of pride, she felt the old fire flicker. She reached for his hand. One step at a time, Alexander. For Daniel. For us. His fingers tightened around hers, steady and sure. For the first time in 9 months, he allowed himself to believe in something greater than success. He believed in second chances. Epilogue. Weeks later, as Daniel grew stronger, the three of them stood together in the garden outside the hospital. Alexander bent to lift his son, holding him high against the morning sun, laughter breaking free from him like a man reborn. Elena watched, her heart swelling with cautious hope. 9 months after their world had shattered, fate had given them not just a child, but a chance to rebuild. Not the empire of wealth and ambition Alexander had once prized, but an empire of love, fragile and enduring. And this time, he vowed, he would not let it slip away. 9 months after the divorce, Alexander Hart thought he had buried the ghost of his marriage. He threw himself into work, building companies, investing in empires, living in penthouses no one else dared bid for. His name was a weapon, his wealth a fortress, and his heart, untouchable. Until the phone call came. It was her voice, shaken, quiet, almost unrecognizable. Alexander, it's Elena. I wouldn't call if it wasn't desperate. My son needs surgery, please. Now he stood in the pediatric ward of the city's best hospital, his presence out of place among the sterile white walls. His tailored suit, the sharp click of Italian leather shoes, the aura of power, none of it mattered here. Elena. His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it ran something dangerous. He looked at her where she sat, pale and exhausted, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. She rose slowly, her eyes, once vibrant with laughter, dimmed with worry. Thank you for coming, she whispered. Where is he? She led him through the corridor until they reached the glass window of the ICU. Inside, a small crib held a fragile body, tubes, monitors, tiny chest rising and falling with effort. Alexander's gaze fixed on the baby. Something primal twisted in his chest. "This is your son?" he asked, though the answer was written on Alina's face. "Yes." He turned to her, his jaw tightening. "How old?" 6 months. The calculation was brutal. "Divorce, 9 months ago." He inhaled sharply. "Elena, is he mine?" Her silence told him before the tears did. Finally, she whispered, "Yes." A storm gathered in his eyes. "You hid this from me." "I had to," she said, voice trembling. "You never wanted a family, Alexander. You lived for your empire, for control. I wasn't going to trap you in a life you didn't want." He stared at her, fury and disbelief battling in his chest. He had lost 6 months of his son's life. A son he hadn't even known existed. Before he could speak again, the doctor entered. "The baby needs surgery urgently. It's specialized, and costly." Without it, he didn't finish. "I'll pay for everything," Alexander cut in, his voice steel. The doctor nodded quickly. "We'll prepare." When they were alone again, Elena folded her arms as if to shield herself. "I didn't call you for money alone. I called because he deserves to know his father. But don't think this erases the past." Alexander's gaze softened, though his tone remained firm. "I can't erase the past. But I won't lose my son. Not now, not ever." The night stretched ahead, heavy with unspoken words. Part 2, The Long Night. Hours passed like years. The surgery began, and Elena sat in the waiting room, every muscle tight with dread. Alexander sat beside her, restless, his eyes fixed on the door. For once, the man who commanded billions was powerless. Elena's voice finally broke the silence. "Why did you come?" He turned his head sharply. "Because my son needed me. And if I'd told you sooner." His jaw clenched. "You think I wouldn't have been there? That I wouldn't have cared?" Her eyes glistened. "You didn't care enough for me. You were married to your empire. I was just another acquisition." Alexander's chest tightened. The accusation cut deep because it was true. He had buried her under diamonds, thinking gifts could replace affection, that money could mask his absence. He had failed her, and now he had nearly lost them both. "Elena," he said quietly, "I was wrong. About everything." Before she could respond, the surgeon appeared. Relief softened his features. "The surgery was a success. The baby is stable. Recovery will take time, but the prognosis is good." Elena collapsed into tears, her body shaking with release. Instinctively, Alexander pulled her into his arms. For the first time in years, she didn't resist. For the first time in years, he held her not as a husband, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had almost lost everything. Days of healing. Alexander didn't leave the hospital. He arranged the best specialists, oversaw every detail of Daniel's care. But beyond logistics, he stayed by his son's side, feeding him, holding him, watching every fragile breath. Elena observed him with guarded awe. She had seen him conquer markets, intimidate rivals, but never had she seen him this vulnerable. He spoke to Daniel in hushed tones, brushed a gentle hand across his tiny cheek, and in those moments, he was not the billionaire. He was simply a father. One evening, as Daniel slept peacefully, Alexander turned to her. His voice was quiet but steady. "I want to be part of his life. Not as a benefactor, as his father. And if you'll let me, as more than that." Her heart clenched. "Alexander, I know I failed you," he admitted. "I thought building an empire was enough, that wealth could substitute love. I was wrong. I don't want a second chance at business or fortune. I want a second chance with you. With us." Tears shimmered in Elena's eyes. She wanted to protect herself, to shield her heart from the man who had once broken it. But watching him cradle their son, she felt the walls she'd built begin to crack. "One step at a time," she whispered. "For Daniel. For us." His hand found hers, strong, steady. "For us." Epilogue. Weeks later, as Daniel grew stronger, the three of them walked together in the hospital garden. Alexander lifted his son toward the sunlight, laughter breaking from his lips like a man reborn. Elena stood beside him, her heart swelling with cautious hope. 9 months after divorce had shattered their world, fate had returned not just a child, but a chance to rebuild. Not the empire of cold ambition Alexander had once prized, but an empire of love, fragile, precious, enduring. And this time, he would not let it slip away.